Ladies and gentlemen, tonight we step into a territory many avoid, the hidden corners of the human soul. We often celebrate light, goodness, and virtue, but rarely do we confront the darker truths that live within us. Yet to ignore them is to live half a life. The theme before us is not one of comfort, but of honesty. It is about courage, not the courage to conquer the world outside, but the far greater courage to face the one within. And so, I invite you to listen with openness, for what you are about to hear speaks not only of human weakness, but of human wholeness. Everyone hides a part of themselves they fear to confront. It is the unspoken truth of human existence, the quiet burden carried in the silence of the mind. No matter how carefully we polish the surface of our personality, no matter how brightly we shine in the eyes of others, there remains within us a shadow we would rather not see. It is not an invention, not a lie we tell ourselves, but a living reality, an aspect of our being that slips into the hidden corners of thought and action, waiting for moments when our guard is down. This hidden part is not just a small weakness or flaw, it is the side of us that feels dangerous, shameful, or unbearable. It is what we dread to acknowledge because acknowledging it would mean admitting that we are not the ideal versions of ourselves we pretend to be. It shows itself in subtle ways, in moments when jealousy burns through our chest at someone else's success, even though we smile and congratulate them. It appears when anger surges in us more violently than the situation requires, hinting at something deeper than the present moment. It lurks when selfishness drives us. Though we cover it with excuses of necessity, it emerges in our private fantasies, our secret thoughts, our quiet desires, the ones we would never dare to voice. Each of us knows this presence, though we rarely admit it, and so we lock it away. We bury it. We wear a mask for the world, a mask for our family, our friends, our colleagues, sometimes even a mask for ourselves. But what is buried does not die. The hidden self does not vanish simply because we refuse to look at it. On the contrary, the more we suppress it, the stronger its hold becomes. It waits in silence, influencing us from beneath consciousness, shaping our choices, bending our reactions, coloring the way we see the world. We say we are angry because of others, but often the anger is an echo of the rage we never faced in ourselves. We say we fear betrayal because of past wounds, but often it is because we have betrayed our own values and do not want to remember it. The hidden part of us whispers through our behavior, through patterns we cannot explain, through mistakes we repeat again and again. We live in fear of being exposed, not only to others, but to ourselves. We are terrified of discovering that we are not as good as we want to believe, that beneath the civilized exterior lies something raw and untamed. To confront it feels like a threat to identity itself, so we hide it behind work, behind relationships, behind distractions and routines. We laugh louder, smile wider, grow busier, and drown ourselves in noise, all so we will not hear the voice that waits in the silence. Yet the harder we hide, the greater the fear becomes, because the unknown always appears larger than it truly is. And yet, if we were to look closely, we would see that what we fear is not only darkness, but potential. The hidden self is not merely weakness, it is also energy. It carries the intensity we suppress, the desires we mute, the strength we hesitate to claim. Anger may conceal courage, jealousy may hide longing, selfishness may mask the simple need to honor oneself. But we cannot see any of this unless we dare to confront what we fear most. Still, most people will continue to run. It feels safer to deny than to accept. But deep down, everyone knows there is something they carry, a secret, a wound, a shadow that waits. Everyone hides a part of themselves they fear to confront, and it is in that hidden place that their greatest struggle and their greatest possibility resides. What you fear about yourself is not imagination. It is already real. The mind often whispers warnings in the quiet moments, whispers of tendencies, impulses, and truths that unsettle the heart. These whispers are rarely fantasies. They are the reflections of what already lives within. When you fear that you might be selfish, it is because you have already acted in selfish ways, even if you disguise them. When you fear that you are weak, it is because somewhere in your life, weakness has already shown itself. When you dread the possibility of cruelty, it is because the seed of cruelty has already stirred in thought, even if it never reached your hands or tongue. The fear does not come from the unknown, but from a recognition, half buried, of what is already part of you. People believe their darkest qualities lie ahead of them, waiting to appear in some future moment of failure. But the truth is that these qualities already exist in the present, woven into the fabric of their being. They are not figments of the imagination, but realities glimpsed and then denied. The heart knows its own shadows, and the fear is born not from invention, but from remembrance. A single careless word, a hidden thought of envy, a flash of temper. These are the proofs that the fear is real. Yet the mind recoils, refusing to look too closely because to see clearly would be to admit that the frightening part of oneself is not a possibility but a reality. The self you fear lives in subtle gestures, in fleeting emotions that you brush aside as meaningless. It is because resent in the impatience you show when no one is watching, in the bitterness you swallow and pretend to forget, in the coldness you feel but never reveal. These fragments, scattered and quiet, are real parts of you. They are not phantoms created by an overactive imagination. They are glimpses of the shadow you carry, the self that waits beyond the mask. And every time you sense them, every time a flash of fear rises, what if this is who I truly am? It is because some part of you already knows that it is true. To live in denial of this reality is to misunderstand the nature of fear. Fear is not simply a warning of what could be. Often, it is the recognition of what already is. A liar fears being exposed, not because they might lie in the future, but because the lie has already been spoken. A coward fears weakness, not because weakness may one day arrive, but because it already flows through their decisions. A selfish soul fears judgment, not because selfishness is waiting in the distance, but because it already colors their actions. Fear in this sense is the mirror the psyche holds up, and though the reflection is dim, we sense enough of it to tremble. Imagination is powerful, but imagination does not create what we most dread. The darkest visions of ourselves come not from invention, but from recognition. We know, without admitting it, that the possibility of betrayal exists because we have already betrayed in thought or deed. We know that cruelty exists because, even if for a moment, we have wished harm. We know that weakness exists because we have already surrendered when strength was needed. These truths do not belong to some distant self we might become, but to the self we already are, buried beneath layers of denial and disguise. And so the fear persists, because it cannot be escaped. It lingers in the silence between words, in the conscience that stirs at night, in the uneasy feeling that the mask will one day slip. What you fear about yourself is not imagination. It is the reality you have glimpsed but refuse to hold. It waits for acknowledgement, it waits for confrontation, it waits for the courage to be seen. Until then, it remains in the shadows, real, present, and undeniably part of you. We all wear a mask, a polished version of ourselves shown to the world. It is not a mask of deception in the ordinary sense, but one crafted out of necessity, shaped by expectation, and held in place by fear. From the earliest days of childhood, we begin to learn that certain parts of us are welcome, and others are not. A child who cries too loudly is told to be quiet. A child who shows anger is scolded for being rude. A child who is too curious is told not to ask so many questions. Piece by piece, we learn to hide the traits that bring disapproval, and we begin to create a version of ourselves that is more acceptable, more pleasing, more polished. That version slowly hardens into the mask we present to the world. The mask smiles when we feel like frowning. It nods in agreement when deep down we want to resist. It pretends to be confident when insecurity trembles within. Over time, this mask becomes so familiar that we forget where it ends and where the true self begins. We introduce ourselves to others as though the mask is who we are, because to reveal the unguarded self feels dangerous, even unbearable. And yet in quiet moments when the world is silent and we are left alone with our own reflection, we sense the difference. We sense the distance between the polished image and the raw, unfiltered truth of who we are. This mask is not inherently false. It is a part of us, but only a fragment. It is the side shaped by culture, by family, by society's demand for order and civility. Without it, human interaction would be chaos. With it, there is structure and harmony. But the mask becomes dangerous when it is mistaken for the whole self. When we forget that beneath the polished exterior lives another dimension, flawed, emotional, contradictory, alive, we begin to live in a half-truth. We trade authenticity for acceptance. Consider how often the mask operates in daily life. At work, we speak in tones of professionalism even when irritation rises. Among friends, we hide our deepest struggles, afraid they would not understand. With strangers, we put on charm to avoid being dismissed. Even in love, where vulnerability should be most possible, we hesitate to show the rawest parts of our soul, fearful that the truth will drive affection away. The mask is everywhere, smoothing the rough edges, concealing the storms, presenting a version of ourselves designed to be easier to digest. Yet the longer we wear it, the heavier it becomes. The polished version may gain admiration, respect, or acceptance, but it can also leave us feeling hollow. For what is the worth of being loved for the mask, if the hidden self remains unseen, unknown, untouched? People may praise our strength while we secretly drown in weakness. They may admire our kindness while we quietly wrestle with resentment. They may celebrate our confidence while we hide trembling doubt. In such moments, the applause feels empty, for it is the mask being praised, not the self. Still, we continue to hold it in place. To remove it feels like stepping into fire. The fear of rejection burns stronger than the desire for honesty. What if the world cannot bear the truth of who we are? What if the flaws are too raw, too shameful, too unworthy of acceptance? And so we keep the mask polished, smiling outwardly, while the unpolished self waits in silence. But even if we never fully remove it, the mask cannot erase the reality it conceals. It can only delay the moment of recognition. In every crack of exhaustion, in every unguarded word, in every slip of emotion, the hidden self leaks through. We glimpse it in our own reflection, in the moments we cannot perform, when the face collapses and the truth shines through. It is then we realize that the mask was never the whole story, only the version we believed the world could handle. We all wear a mask, a polished version of ourselves shown to the world, but behind it lives the unpolished truth, the raw, imperfect, and deeply human self that no mask can silence forever. Beneath the mask lives the forgotten self, the shadow. It is the part of us that does not receive applause, the side we keep hidden in the dark corners of the psyche. While the mask is carefully polished to be admired, the shadow is the neglected figure that carries everything we reject, deny, or fear about ourselves. It is not an invention, but a reality that has been pushed away so deeply that we pretend it no longer exists. Yet it remains, silent but alive, shaping our emotions, coloring our choices, and revealing itself in ways we often fail to notice. The shadow begins forming the moment we realize that not every aspect of us is welcome. A child who feels anger may be told that anger is wrong, so the feeling is hidden. A child who shows envy or greed is corrected sharply, so those impulses are pushed out of sight. A teenager who feels vulnerable may be mocked for weakness, so they bury it beneath a hard exterior. In this way, little by little, we exile certain traits from our conscious identity. They do not disappear, but sink into the depths of the shadow, where they live in silence, carrying the weight of rejection. Because these qualities are hidden, they gain a mysterious power. What is repressed? It does not vanish, it grows. The shadow makes itself known in sudden bursts of emotion we cannot explain. It appears in moments when rage flares unexpectedly, when envy eats at us more fiercely than we admit, when fear holds us back though we pretend to be brave. We may tell ourselves we are kind, generous, and patient, yet the shadow proves otherwise in moments when life squeezes us. Then, without warning, the forgotten self takes the stage, showing us the parts we work so hard to deny. The shadow is not always dark in the way we imagine. It does not contain only cruelty, weakness, or selfishness. It also hides our unclaimed potential, the gifts we were too afraid to own. A person may hide their ambition because they fear being judged as arrogant. Another may hide their creativity because they were once told it was foolish. Some bury their desires for love or intimacy because those longings made them feel vulnerable. In this way, the shadow becomes not only the container of our flaws, but also the prison of our hidden strengths. It carries both the poison and the medicine, both the danger and the possibility of transformation. We meet the shadow not only within ourselves, but also in the way we see others. The traits we despise in those around us often mirror the very qualities we have buried. A person who cannot stand arrogance may secretly struggle with their own pride. Someone who hates weakness in others may be terrified of facing their own fragility. The shadow projects itself outward, showing us on the faces of others what we refuse to acknowledge in the mirror. This is why encounters with certain people can provoke such strong reactions. They awaken the forgotten self within us. To live with a shadow is to carry a silent companion everywhere you go. You may polish your mask, present your best face to the world, and succeed in convincing others that the mask is who you are. But the shadow follows you nonetheless. It shows itself in dreams, in slips of the tongue, in unexplained emotions, in patterns that repeat across your life. No matter how deeply you bury it, it refuses to be destroyed, because it is not something foreign. It is you. It is the part of you that waits to be remembered, the side that was abandoned, yet never left. Beneath the mask lives this forgotten self, the shadow, carrying both the wounds and the hidden treasures of your being. To ignore it is to live in half-truth, but to recognize it is to finally see the whole of who you are. The shadow holds traits we deny: envy, rage, weakness, selfishness, cruelty. These are the qualities we are taught to turn away from, the impulses we silence, the emotions we quickly bury whenever they surface. Society praises kindness, patience, strength, and generosity, but it frowns upon the darker currents that flow beneath the surface of every human being. From childhood onward, we learn to smile when we feel envy, to suppress our anger when it boils over, to hide our fragility, to cover our selfish desires, and to keep silent about the thoughts that feel cruel or unworthy. Over time, these rejected traits do not disappear. Instead, they are pushed down into the hidden chamber of the psyche, forming what is called the shadow. Envy is one of the most common pieces of the shadow. Outwardly, we may congratulate a friend on their success, but inwardly, something twists. We feel the sting of comparison, the quiet ache of wanting what another has. Because envy is seen as small-minded and shameful, we deny it. We push it into the shadows of our heart, pretending it is not there, but its presence still influences us. It shapes the way we compete, the way we measure ourselves, the way we secretly resent those who shine too brightly. Rage, too, finds its place in the shadow. Politeness, civility, and self-control are praised, while raw, uncontrolled anger is condemned. And so, when the fire rises within us, we bite our tongues, we swallow our words, we pretend to be calm. Yet rage does not vanish because it is suppressed. It lurks beneath the surface, building pressure, waiting for the moment it bursts forth in sudden, destructive ways. Sometimes it escapes in violence, sometimes in cutting words, sometimes in quiet bitterness that poisons relationships. Rage denied is not rage erased. It is rage amplified, hidden in the dark. Weakness is another trait we cast into the shadow. We are told to be strong, to stand tall, to endure. Weakness is mocked, pitied, or dismissed, and so we hide the moments when we feel small, insecure, or broken. We cover them with bravado, with forced confidence, with a smile that does not match what we feel inside. Yet weakness is part of being human. To deny it is to deny our own fragility. In the shadow, weakness festers, becoming shame, becoming the silent fear that we are never enough. It makes us hide from others, and worse, from ourselves. Selfishness, too, lives there. To put oneself first is often condemned as arrogance or greed, and so we pretend that every action we take is for others. But deep down, every person carries self-interest, the longing to preserve one's own comfort, one's own desires, one's own gain. When selfishness is denied, it does not disappear. It disguises itself. It seeps into hidden motives, shaping decisions that outwardly appear generous, but are quietly self-serving. The shadow holds this selfishness, reminding us of the gap between the image we present and the truth of what drives us. And then there is cruelty, the darkest of the traits we bury. Few people wish to admit that the capacity for cruelty lies within them, yet every cutting remark, every moment of silent satisfaction at another's pain, every fantasy of revenge reveals that cruelty is not foreign to us. It is human. We may never act upon it openly, but the thought alone is enough to show us that cruelty is a part of the shadow's domain. To deny it is to live in the illusion that we are only kind, only compassionate, only good. Together, these traits, envy, rage, weakness, selfishness, cruelty, form a hidden constellation within the human soul. They are not illusions, but realities we refuse to face. The shadow gathers them, carries them, and waits in silence. And though we deny them, they remain, shaping our lives in ways we cannot fully control. Fear is not about discovering something new, but about recognizing what already exists. What unsettles us most is not the unknown, but the familiar that we have worked tirelessly to ignore. The heart knows the truth long before the mind is ready to face it. What we call fear is often the trembling that arises when the hidden self comes close to the surface, when the mask begins to slip, when the shadows we have buried start to take form in the light of awareness. We tremble not because something foreign is approaching, but because something deeply intimate, something that belongs to us, is demanding to be seen. Consider how fear often arises in moments of silence, when the noise of life fades and we are left alone with ourselves. In those quiet spaces, memories, impulses, and truths begin to stir, truths we spend most of our lives drowning out with distractions. The fear that surfaces then is not fear of an external danger. It is fear of recognition, the realization that beneath our polished identity lives a version of ourselves we have long avoided. It is the recognition that our envy, our anger, our selfishness, our weaknesses are not passing illusions but living realities within us. This is why fear can feel so personal, so intimate, so sharp. It cuts into us not as a stranger, but as a reminder. A person does not fear being fragile without reason. They fear it because fragility has already shown itself in their life. A person does not fear being cruel without cause. They fear it because, in thought or action, cruelty has already brushed against them. Fear does not spring from emptiness. It emerges from the contact between our conscious self and the truths we have pressed down into the unconscious. It is the echo of something we already know but refuse to claim. Look at the way fear operates in our relationships. A person terrified of betrayal often carries the memory of betrayal. Perhaps they once betrayed themselves by silencing their needs, or perhaps they betrayed another in a moment they would rather forget. That fear is not about some future possibility. It is recognition of a wound already present. Or take the fear of failure. It is not about a future loss. It comes from the recognition that deep within we have already stumbled, already doubted, already fallen short in ways we have not fully admitted. The fear persists because the experience is not new, it is unresolved. Even our fears of external situations often mirror inner realities. Someone terrified of being judged may already judge themselves harshly in the privacy of their thoughts. Someone who fears being abandoned may already feel abandoned within, disconnected from parts of themselves they never embraced. The external fear is simply a reflection of an inner truth that has gone unacknowledged. What frightens us is not the possibility of what might be, but the recognition of what is already alive within us. And this is why fear clings so persistently. If it were only about something new, it would fade once the threat passed. But because it is about recognition, it lingers. It is not tied only to the outside world, it is tied to the inner landscape of the soul. One can escape external dangers, but one cannot escape oneself. The fear returns again and again, in new forms, in new situations, because its source is not outside, but within. The trembling that comes with fear is the trembling of truth pressing against the walls of denial. We sense that what we tried to bury is still alive, that what we tried to forget continues to shape us. Fear is not discovery, it is remembrance. It is the unmasking of realities we already know in our depths, even if we refuse to name them. And so when fear rises, it is not introducing us to something foreign, it is calling us back to something that has been with us all along. Denial strengthens the shadow and keeps us trapped. When a part of ourselves is pushed away, locked behind the walls of shame or fear, it does not dissolve into nothingness. Instead, it grows heavier, darker, and more powerful in its silence. The act of denial is like feeding the very thing we wish to starve. What we refuse to face does not lose its grip on us, it tightens it. In denying the shadow, we give it a secret life, a hidden authority over our actions and our choices. To deny anger is to allow it to build beneath the surface, accumulating like fire in a sealed chamber, waiting for the smallest spark to ignite it into explosion. To deny envy is to let it shape the way we see others, distorting relationships with resentment and comparison. To deny weakness is to live with the constant fear of being exposed, always performing strength, always exhausted by the effort of hiding. In every case, denial does not eliminate the trait. It merely drives it underground, where it works in silence and in secret. The shadow thrives in secrecy. The less we acknowledge it, the more control it has over us. A person who denies their selfishness, for example, may loudly insist on their generosity, yet in unseen ways, their decisions and motives bend toward self-interest. They cannot see it, for they have blinded themselves, but others often feel the weight of it. Another person who denies their capacity for cruelty may present an image of compassion and kindness, but in moments of stress or frustration, cutting words slip out, or subtle acts of harm appear. Because the shadow has been denied, it acts without restraint, free from the boundaries of awareness. This entrapment reveals itself in cycles we cannot seem to break. A person who denies their fear of failure may continually avoid challenges, convincing themselves they are being wise, when in truth they are imprisoned by their unacknowledged weakness. Another who denies their anger may repeatedly fall into toxic relationships. unable to set boundaries, always swallowing resentment until it festers into despair. These patterns repeat not because the individual is cursed, but because what is denied continues to steer their life from the shadows. Denial also fuels projection. When we cannot admit a trait in ourselves, we become hypersensitive to it in others. The person who denies their pride will rage against arrogance in those around them. The one who denies their own weakness will scorn fragility wherever they see it. In this way, denial turns the outer world into a mirror of the inner one, trapping us in conflicts that are really with ourselves. We blame, criticize, and condemn others for the very qualities we cannot bear to acknowledge in our own being. What makes denial so powerful is that it feels safe. To admit the shadow seems unbearable, so we tell ourselves it does not exist. We polish the mask, smile wider, and carry on as though the hidden parts are gone. But beneath the surface, they are not only alive, they are strengthened. Like an ignored wound that festers, denial allows the shadow to deepen its roots. The longer it is unseen, the more it dictates our lives. This is the prison of denial. It chains us not by destroying us, but by binding us to the parts of ourselves we pretend are not there. The more fiercely we insist, "This is not me," the more powerfully the shadow declares, "It is." And so we remain trapped, not because the shadow is inherently stronger than us, but because in denying it, we surrender our power. The energy spent in hiding becomes the energy that feeds it. In this way, denial is not a shield from the shadow, it is the source of its strength, and the reason it continues to rule from the dark. Avoiding the truth makes us prisoners of what we reject. When we turn away from the parts of ourselves that disturb us, we believe we are escaping them. We believe that by refusing to look, by distracting ourselves, by covering the rawness with polished masks, we can make those parts disappear. Yet the very act of avoidance binds us tighter. The truth we run from does not lose its reality. It grows heavier with every step we take in the opposite direction. What we reject becomes our master, dictating our behavior in ways we cannot see, holding us captive in invisible chains. Avoidance begins subtly. We feel a surge of envy and quickly push it away, telling ourselves it is nothing. We feel anger flare inside, and we swallow it, pretending it never rose. We feel fear trembling in our chest, and we bury it beneath forced bravado. Each time we do this, we imagine we have escaped, but the truth we avoid does not vanish. It sinks deeper, becoming a hidden force that moves us without our consent. What is hidden begins to guide our choices, our relationships, our emotions, shaping our lives more than the parts we openly embrace. This hidden control is what makes avoidance so dangerous. A person who refuses to acknowledge their envy may constantly compete with others, always restless, always dissatisfied, yet never understanding why. Another who avoids their anger may live with a smiling face, but carry silent resentment, which slowly poisons their interactions. Someone who avoids fear may never take risks, cloaking their hesitation in the language of responsibility, while secretly imprisoned by their own insecurities. In every case, avoidance does not protect us, it imprisons us. The prison is built from illusions. We tell ourselves we are free of envy, free of rage, free of weakness, free of cruelty. We take pride in the mask we show, believing it to be our only truth. But the rejected parts wait in silence, steering us like unseen hands. The more we insist they are not there, the stronger their grip becomes. The person who claims never to feel selfishness may end up acting selfishly without realizing it, driven by motives they cannot admit. The one who insists they are never cruel may wound others with subtle words or gestures, blind to the harm they cause. By avoiding the truth, they are not free. They are enslaved to what they cannot face. Avoidance also blinds us to our patterns. Life repeats itself, bringing us back again and again to the same struggles, the same conflicts, the same mistakes. We wonder why we fall into similar relationships, why the same failures meet us, why the same emotions return. The answer lies in the truth we reject. What is denied inside continues to manifest outside, shaping our path until we can no longer ignore it. We are trapped in cycles because the truth we avoid is the very key that could break them. This prison extends even to how we see others. What we reject in ourselves, we project onto those around us. Unable to face our own pride, we accuse others of arrogance. Unable to admit our own weakness, we despise fragility in others. Unable to confront our own anger, we fear the anger of others. The world becomes a distorted mirror of our rejected truths, and we walk through it chained by judgments that are, in reality, reflections of ourselves. Avoidance may feel like safety, but it is only captivity disguised as protection. The walls of this prison are built from denial, but they are strong enough to confine us. Every truth we reject becomes a guard at the door, every hidden trait a lock on the chain. We live not as free beings, but as fugitives from ourselves, forever running, forever hiding, never realizing that the escape we long for is impossible while the truth remains buried. By avoiding it, we hand it the very power we hoped to take away. Wholeness is achieved not by perfection, but by integration of light and darkness. To seek perfection is to chase an illusion, a polished image that denies the depth and complexity of human existence. Perfection demands the elimination of flaws, the eradication of weakness, the constant masking of what does not fit an ideal. But life is not built on elimination, it is built on inclusion. Wholeness does not come from cutting away the parts of ourselves that disturb us, but from embracing them, holding them alongside the light, and allowing both to exist within the same soul. The human spirit is not purely luminous nor entirely shadowed, it is both at once. Within us live tenderness and cruelty, courage and fear, love and envy, creation and destruction. To strive for perfection is to deny this reality, to insist that one half of the self is the only truth. Yet by denying one half, we become incomplete, fragmented, always at war with ourselves. Integration, on the other hand, acknowledges that the shadow is not the enemy, but a part of the whole. It is in the weaving together of these opposites that true wholeness emerges. The light within us reveals our capacity for kindness, creativity, love, and hope. It shines in our dreams and inspires us to grow. But without the darkness, the light becomes fragile, naive, and shallow. Darkness grounds us, showing us the limits of our strength, the rawness of our instincts, the reality of our desires and fears. It humbles us by reminding us of what we are capable of when stripped of masks and ideals. To integrate darkness is to bring honesty into the light, to admit the truths we would rather conceal, and to allow them to live alongside our virtues. Consider a person who strives only to be good. They present kindness in every interaction, avoid conflict, and suppress every sign of anger or selfishness. On the surface, they appear flawless. Yet beneath, resentment grows, unspoken needs fester, and authenticity withers. Their goodness is a mask, not a truth. By rejecting their anger, they deny themselves boundaries. By hiding their selfish impulses, they cut themselves off from the ability to assert their own needs. They are not whole. They are divided. True wholeness would not ask them to abandon kindness, but to integrate it with the strength that comes from acknowledging anger, the honesty that arises from admitting imperfection. Integration allows us to transform. When rage is denied, it erupts in destructive bursts. When it is integrated, it becomes power, clarity, and the energy to defend what matters. When fear is denied, it paralyzes us in secret. When it is integrated, it becomes caution, awareness, and wisdom. When envy is denied, it corrodes relationships. When it is integrated, it points to hidden desires, showing us what we long for and urges toward growth. In this way, the darkness is not meant to be erased but reshaped, carried into the light where it can be used as a source of strength. Wholeness is not purity. It is not the absence of contradiction, but the harmony of contradiction. It is the ability to look within and say, I am both gentle and fierce, both strong and fragile, both noble and flawed. To stand in that truth is to be free of the exhausting performance of perfection. It is to live authentically, no longer chained by what we deny or shamed by what we cannot eradicate. Wholeness means to walk as a complete being, holding both light and darkness without fear, knowing that each side gives meaning to the other. Perfection isolates us from ourselves, but integration reconciles us. It invites us to gather every fragment we have rejected and bring it into the circle of our being. Only then can we live fully, not as half-beings chasing impossible ideals, but as whole souls, luminous and shadowed, carrying the fullness of what it means to be human. The shadow contains hidden strength as well as danger. It is easy to imagine the shadow only as a place of weakness, corruption, or shame, a dark pit of instincts that must be avoided at all costs. Yet this view is incomplete. The shadow is not merely the repository of what we despise, it is also the vault of what we have suppressed, the raw and untamed energy that can both harm and heal, destroy and empower. Within it lives danger, yes, but also a strength we cannot access until we turn to face it. The danger of the shadow lies in its secrecy. What we deny in ourselves does not disappear. It operates without our knowledge, influencing actions, choices, and relationships in ways that escape our control. A person who denies their aggression may find it emerging in moments of rage, wounding those closest to them. Another who denies selfishness may act with manipulation under the guise of generosity, hurting others while convincing themselves they are kind. Left unacknowledged, the shadow becomes a hidden ruler, dangerous precisely because it works unseen. The traits we repress express themselves indirectly, and their expression is often distorted, exaggerated, and destructive. Yet alongside this danger lies a reservoir of untapped potential. The aggression we fear, when integrated, becomes the power to defend, the courage to set boundaries, the fire to overcome obstacles. The selfishness we reject when understood becomes the ability to honor our own needs, to care for ourselves so we do not collapse under the weight of others' demands. The envy we hide, when faced honestly, reveals what we truly desire, giving us direction for growth and motivation to strive toward what we value. What once seemed only shameful can, when brought into awareness, become a source of vitality and transformation. The shadow is the keeper of raw energy. When denied, this energy erupts destructively, but when acknowledged, it becomes fuel. Consider the person who represses anger for years. When it finally breaks free, it may appear as violence, cruelty, or deep bitterness. But if that anger had been faced and integrated earlier, it could have become a source of passion, clarity, and the strength to resist injustice. The danger is real, but the strength is equally real. Two sides of the same force, one destructive when hidden, the other empowering when brought into the light. This duality is what makes the shadow so essential to confront. To ignore it is to live in fear of what lurks below, always at risk of being overpowered by its sudden eruptions. To acknowledge it is to claim the strength it offers. The person who accepts their capacity for cruelty does not become crueler. They become more mindful of it, less controlled by it, and more capable of choosing compassion consciously. The person who admits their weakness does not grow weaker. They become stronger, for they no longer waste energy pretending to be invincible. In owning the shadow, they discover resilience hidden within vulnerability. The danger of the shadow also lies in projection. What we refuse to see in ourselves, we project onto others, condemning them for qualities we cannot bear to admit are our own. This breeds conflict, misunderstanding, and division. But within that same mechanism lies strength. If we can recognize our projections, we gain insight into the parts of ourselves we have overlooked. What irritates us most in others often points directly to our own hidden shadow. Thus, even the discomfort of projection can be a guide towards self-awareness, showing us where our greatest dangers and our greatest strengths reside. The shadow, then, is not simply an enemy to be feared. It is a paradox, a container of both poison and medicine. To drink without caution is to be harmed, but to refuse to drink at all is to wither. Its energy is dangerous when denied, but it becomes strength when integrated. To face the shadow is to reclaim what has been lost to fear, to harness what once ruled us in silence, and to walk with a fuller sense of who we are. In its darkness lives the very power we seek, and in its danger lies the doorway to our hidden strength. Buried anger can fuel passion when integrated. Anger, when left unacknowledged, often seeps into the hidden corners of our being, where it simmers and hardens, waiting for a release. Many are taught to fear anger, to suppress it, to see it only as destructive fire that must be extinguished at all costs, and so it is pushed down, buried deep in the psyche, layered over with masks of politeness, control, and false calm. Yet anger, in its raw essence, is not only destruction, it is energy. It is a flame that, when denied, burns in the shadows and consumes us from within, but when faced and integrated, becomes the very spark that fuels passion, determination, and the drive to act with purpose. The danger of buried anger is that it does not stay silent forever. It leaks out in ways we do not expect, in bitterness that taints our words, in resentment that corrodes relationships, in irritability that flares at minor inconveniences. Buried anger festers, turning into cynicism or despair. It weighs the heart down with heaviness, leaving us stuck in cycles of frustration. But what if that same anger, instead of being buried, was understood and transformed? What if the energy it carried was reclaimed and redirected? For within every surge of anger lies a truth. Something has been violated, a boundary crossed, a value dismissed. To recognize this truth is to uncover the seed of passion hidden within the rage. When integrated, anger becomes clarity. It shows us what matters, what we cannot ignore, what we are willing to fight for. The person who feels anger at injustice is not consumed when they integrate it. They are moved to act, to speak, to create change. The one who feels anger at betrayal, when they integrate it, gains the strength to set boundaries and demand honesty. In this way, anger is not a chain but a compass, pointing toward what we love enough to protect. Without anger, passion is weak, for it lacks fire. But with anger integrated, passion burns brightly, grounded in authenticity and charged with energy that refuses to be silenced. Buried anger also blocks vitality. To suppress it is to suppress life force itself, for anger is one of the most primal expressions of energy the human body can generate. The jaw clenches, the fists tighten, the chest burns, all signs of power seeking release. When this energy is locked away, the individual becomes numb, flat, disconnected from the fullness of their emotions. But when anger is acknowledged, that same intensity is released into creativity, ambition, and courage. Artists who paint from anger create works that pulse with life. Leaders who channel their anger inspire movement. Hence, ordinary people who integrate anger transform it into resilience, determination, and the will to pursue their deepest desires. The integration of anger requires honesty. It demands that we admit to ourselves, yes, I am angry. Yes, something in me burns. This admission does not mean we surrender to rage or lash out without control. Instead, it allows us to listen to the message beneath the anger. What is this fire telling me? What has been ignored? What do I care for so deeply that I cannot remain silent? Through this process, anger becomes a teacher. It is not an enemy to be defeated, but a guide pointing toward passion and purpose. Anger integrated is no longer blind destruction. It is refined energy, a force that can tear down what is false and build up what is true. It gives voice to the silenced and strength to the weary. It refuses apathy, shakes us from complacency, and drives us to act with conviction. Buried, it poisons. Integrated, it heals. Buried, it corrodes. Integrated, it ignites. Passion is nothing without the fire of emotion behind it, and anger, when transformed, becomes one of the most potent fuels for a life lived fully, fiercely, and authentically. Hidden fear can transform into wisdom. Fear is often seen as weakness, a flaw to be concealed, a trembling voice we try to silence within ourselves. Many learn to bury it, to mask it with false confidence, to deny it by projecting strength. Yet fear, like every shadowed emotion, does not disappear simply because we turn away from it. It lingers beneath the surface, shaping choices in ways we cannot see, guiding us by avoidance rather than by awareness. But fear is not only paralysis. Beneath its trembling lies a form of clarity. When acknowledged, when brought into consciousness, fear has the power to sharpen perception, deepen understanding, and become a source of wisdom. Hidden fear thrives in the dark. A person who refuses to admit their fear of failure may disguise it as indifference, avoiding opportunities under the guise of not caring. Another who hides fear of rejection may cloak it with arrogance or withdraw from intimacy, convincing themselves they prefer solitude. Yet in both cases, the fear remains, silently controlling every step. Denied fear imprisons us because it leads us to make choices not from freedom but from avoidance. We shrink not because we are incapable, but because we are unwilling to face the trembling truth within us. When fear is faced, however, its meaning changes. Fear is a signal, a messenger carrying knowledge about our limits, our vulnerabilities, and the risks around us. To listen to fear is to recognize danger without being destroyed by it. The soldier who feels fear before battle but acknowledges it becomes alert, aware of every sound, every movement. The traveler who feels fear in unfamiliar places but integrates it becomes cautious, careful, and observant, learning to navigate the unknown with wisdom. Fear heightens attention. It forces us to see what comfort might allow us to ignore. Hidden, it blinds us. Faced, it guides us. This transformation occurs because fear roots itself in awareness of consequences. To be afraid of failure is to recognize the value of what we are attempting. To be afraid of loss is to understand the depth of what we love. To be afraid of death is to feel the weight of life's fragility. These recognitions are not weaknesses. They are wisdom in disguise. They remind us of what matters, of what must be protected, of what deserves our devotion. Fear reveals the stakes of living, and in revealing them, it teaches us to tread carefully, to cherish deeply, and to act with thoughtfulness. Hidden fear also teaches humility. When we admit fear, we admit that we are not invincible, that we can be hurt, that we are vulnerable. This recognition humbles pride and tempers recklessness. It creates space for empathy, for we understand that others, too, carry fears within them. To integrate fear is to soften arrogance and cultivate compassion. The one who acknowledges fear of loss will value their relationships more tenderly. The one who admits fear of failure will admire the courage of those who attempt. Wisdom grows out of this humility, for it allows us to see ourselves and others without illusion. The wisdom of fear is also tied to courage. Courage is not the absence of fear, but the willingness to move forward in spite of it. Those who deny their fear cannot be truly courageous, for they act from blindness, not from strength. But those who face fear consciously, who integrate it, discover a deeper kind of bravery. They know the risks, they feel the trembling, and still they step ahead. This is wisdom, not reckless defiance, but thoughtful persistence, the balance between awareness of danger and commitment to action. In this way, hidden fear, once brought into light, becomes an ally. It stops being the silent chain that holds us back and becomes the lantern that illuminates the path. It warns of danger without forbidding movement. It sharpens our senses without paralyzing our steps. The very trembling we once despised reveals itself as guidance, as a call to pay attention, as a source of depth and understanding. To live without acknowledging fear is to live blindly. To live with fear integrated is to live wisely, carrying within us both vulnerability and awareness, both caution and courage. Denied selfishness can teach healthy self-boundaries. Many grow up learning that selfishness is shameful, that to think of oneself is wrong, that to put one's own needs for others is a flaw to be erased, and so, the impulse to claim space, to demand rest, to say no, becomes buried under layers of guilt and self-denial. People convince themselves they are generous, endlessly giving, endlessly available, yet beneath this performance, exhaustion builds. Denied selfishness does not vanish. It festers as resentment, bitterness, or quiet suffering. But when this denied part of ourselves is finally acknowledged, it carries a lesson. Selfishness, when understood and integrated, becomes the foundation for healthy boundaries. The danger of denying selfishness lies in how it distorts relationships. A person who never admits their own needs becomes a vessel for others, always saying yes, always bending, always sacrificing. On the surface, this looks virtuous, even admirable, but underneath, frustration grows. They begin to feel unappreciated, taken for granted, even invisible. Yet they cannot point to their own role in this dynamic, for they have denied the part of themselves that longs to claim something for itself. Their hidden selfishness operates indirectly, in passive-aggressive remarks, in quiet withdrawal, or in sudden eruptions of anger that surprise even them. By acknowledging selfishness, we do not become greedy. We become honest. We recognize that every human being carries needs and desires, and to deny them entirely is to deny part of our humanity. When this recognition takes place, a shift occurs. Selfishness reveals itself not as a curse, but as a signal. It tells us when we are giving too much, when we are being drained, when we are crossing our own limits. The impulse to be selfish is often a cry from the self. I matter too, my needs exist, my energy is not infinite. To heed this cry is not cruelty but wisdom. From this awareness arises the capacity to set boundaries. Boundaries are not walls to shut others out, but lines that protect balance between giving and receiving. Without them, generosity collapses into martyrdom. With them, generosity becomes sustainable, for it flows from a place that is replenished rather than depleted. Denied selfishness teaches us this truth. It shows us that without listening to our own needs, we cannot truly give to others without harming ourselves. The lesson hidden within selfishness is that self-care and self-protection are necessary, not optional. Consider the person who has always denied their selfishness. They say yes to every request, take on every burden, and silence every protest within. Eventually, they find themselves resentful toward those they help, feeling secretly used, though outwardly still smiling. This resentment is the voice of the denied selfishness. If, instead, they had allowed themselves to say no, to rest, to step back, they could have offered their help freely and without bitterness. In this way, selfishness, when integrated, preserves the purity of generosity by preventing it from being poisoned by resentment. Selfishness also reveals the importance of balance. Too much selfishness, unchecked, becomes exploitation. Too little, denied completely, becomes self-erasure. But integrated selfishness strikes a middle path. It teaches us to give while also receiving, to care for others without abandoning ourselves. It transforms relationships by making them mutual rather than one-sided. When one honors their own needs, they also respect the needs of others, for they recognize that everyone must have space to exist fully. In truth, selfishness is not only about taking, it is about knowing where we end and another begins. It is about recognizing the self as distinct, with its own boundaries, its own rights, its own dignity. This reality keeps us trapped in cycles of overgiving and silent resentment. Integrating it allows us to stand firmly in who we are, to protect our energy, and to offer love, help, and care from a place of authenticity. Denied selfishness, then, is not a flaw to bury, but a teacher in disguise. By facing it, we learn that self-preservation is not cruelty, and saying no is not betrayal. It is through this acknowledgement that we discover the power of boundaries, boundaries that protect not only ourselves, but also the integrity of our relationships. In learning to embrace the shadow of selfishness, we learn how to live with balance, authenticity, and a deeper form of generosity. Confronting the shadow is the path to inner freedom. The shadow is the collection of all we deny, repress, and refuse to admit within ourselves, the envy we mask with forced cheer, the anger hidden beneath a polite smile, the weakness disguised as strength, the selfishness cloaked in generosity. These parts of us do not vanish simply because we reject them. They remain, living in the unseen corners of our psyche, influencing our choices and shaping our lives without our awareness. To run from them is to live in chains, bound by what we pretend does not exist. True freedom begins only when we turn and face the shadow, acknowledging its presence and integrating its truths. Avoidance of the shadow creates an inner prison. A person who insists they are always kind may erupt in cruelty when provoked, shocked by the very behavior they denied could ever come from them. Another who denies their fear may become paralyzed in moments that demand courage, unable to explain why. The shadow, left unacknowledged, acts without restraint because it has been exiled from consciousness. By refusing to face it, we allow it to govern us from the dark. What we will not own begins to own us, and the freedom we imagine we have is an illusion. Confrontation changes this dynamic. To look directly at the shadow is to strip it of secrecy. It is to admit, yes, I am capable of anger. Yes, envy lives in me. Yes, I carry weakness, selfishness, pride. This honesty is not comfortable, but it is liberating. The chains begin to break the moment we stop pretending. Instead of fearing eruptions of hidden emotions, we learn to recognize them as part of ourselves. Instead of being blindsided by destructive impulses, we can guide them, reshape them, and even harness their power. Awareness gives choice, and choice is the essence of freedom. The shadow does not exist only to harm. It holds energies that, once confronted, can be transformed. Buried anger becomes passion and determination. Denied fear becomes caution and wisdom. Repressed selfishness becomes the strength to create healthy boundaries. Even cruelty, when faced, teaches compassion, for it reveals the depth of our capacity to wound, and thus the importance of choosing kindness. Each dark aspect, once acknowledged, offers a gift, a hidden resource that enriches the soul. But these gifts remain locked away as long as we refuse to confront them. The path of confrontation is not about erasing darkness, but about integrating it. Light without shadow is fragile, shallow, easily broken by the first storm, but light that has embraced shadow shines with depth and authenticity. To confront the shadow is to accept that we are not perfect beings of pure goodness, nor hopelessly corrupt creatures of darkness, but complex and whole. Freedom comes from no longer fighting with ourselves, from ending the exhausting war between who we are and who we pretend to be. This inner freedom reveals itself in relationships as well. When we confront our shadow, we stop projecting it onto others. We no longer blame others for qualities we secretly deny in ourselves. We no longer rage at arrogance while hiding our own pride, or despise weakness while masking our own fragility. By owning these traits, we free ourselves from the distorted mirrors of projection and begin to see others with clarity and compassion. Relationships become freer, lighter, because they are no longer burdened by the weight of our denial. The shadow is not an enemy but a gatekeeper. It stands at the threshold of authenticity, demanding that we face what we would rather avoid. Those who turn away remain trapped, bound by invisible chains. Those who confront it step into a deeper kind of freedom, the freedom to live honestly, to feel fully, to act with integrity. To walk this path is not easy, for it requires courage to face what lurks within. But in that confrontation lies the liberation of the soul. To stand whole, with both light and darkness integrated, is to discover freedom not as escape, but as the power to be fully and truly oneself. To face your worst fear is to reclaim lost parts of yourself. Fear often feels like a wall, a barrier too overwhelming to cross. It rises in the mind as a force that freezes movement, steals breath, and convinces us that we are smaller than we are. Most people run from it, circling around it, building lives that carefully avoid what they most dread. Yet what we do not realize is that the very fear we flaw from guards something precious, a piece of ourselves that has been abandoned in the shadows. To face that fear is not merely to endure discomfort, it is to retrieve what was exiled, to restore whole, and to awaken power that has long been asleep. Fear is rarely about external threats alone. It is about the truths we resist, the parts of ourselves we do not want to see. A person who fears rejection often carries within them a longing for deep connection that was silenced long ago. Another who fears failure may have hidden away their ambition, their dreams, their creative fire. Someone who fears anger may have buried their strength, mistaking it for danger. Each fear conceals an aspect of the self that was deemed unsafe, unwanted, or too heavy to bear. In running from the fear, we also run from the self that lives behind it. To confront fear is to strip away the illusion that it is larger than us. In the act of turning toward it, we discover that fear is a messenger, not a master. It speaks of pain we have not resolved, desires we have not honored, truths we have not admitted. When we listen, rather than flee, we begin to reclaim what was lost. The one who faces the fear of rejection learns to express vulnerability and discovers the strength to love openly. The one who faces the fear of failure learns resilience, understanding that mistakes do not erase worth. The one who faces the fear of conflict learns that anger can serve justice and protect dignity. In this way, every fear contains a key, and every key unlocks a door to a forgotten part of ourselves. The process is not without struggle. Facing fear often feels like stepping into fire, but it is through fire that metals are refined. Fear tests us, strips away illusions, and forces us into honesty. Yet on the other side of that test, something vital is returned. The child who once silenced their voice out of fear of punishment may, as an adult, reclaim the courage to speak truth. The dreamer who once abandoned their passion out of fear of criticism may reignite their creative spark. The individual who once hid this tenderness out of fear of being hurt may reclaim their capacity for love. Each confrontation is a reunion with the parts of ourselves we once exiled for survival. This reclamation is what transforms fear into power. What was once paralyzing becomes liberating. A person who has faced their deepest fear no longer lives in chains. They carry themselves differently, not because fear has vanished, but because they have integrated what it was hiding. They walk with wholeness, grounded in the truth that even their darkest anxieties cannot destroy them. This inner freedom radiates outward, influencing relationships, choices, and dreams. Others may see only strength, but that strength is born from the willingness to confront the very places most people avoid. To face fear is to step into authenticity. It is to stop living half a life, cut off from what has been buried, and to live as a complete being, carrying both light and shadow. In doing so, we no longer fear fear itself. We recognize it as the threshold to deeper knowing, to fuller being. And each time we walk through that threshold, we reclaim another fragment of ourselves, another piece of the soul that had been waiting in silence. What was once terrifying becomes sacred, for it leads us back to who we truly are. Thus, facing your worst fear is not merely an act of bravery. It is an act of homecoming. It is the return of the lost, the healing of the divided, the gathering of the self into wholeness. In fear lies the doorway, and behind it, the parts of you that were waiting to be reclaimed. Human nature contains both destructive and creative powers. Within every individual lies the capacity to tear down and the ability to build, to wound and to heal, to destroy life and to give birth to something entirely new. This duality is not an accident of existence. It is woven into the fabric of what it means to be human. To live is to hold within oneself opposing forces, each demanding acknowledgement, each shaping the direction of our choices and the quality of our existence. Destruction is often seen as negative, a force that must be suppressed or avoided, yet it carries with it a strange necessity. Fire destroys, but it also clears space for new growth. Storms shatter landscapes, but in their aftermath, the soil is enriched and renewal becomes possible. Human beings mirror this same pattern. Anger can fracture relationships, but it can also dismantle injustice. Rebellion can topple structures, but it can also liberate the oppressed. To deny the destructive element in human nature is to misunderstand its role in transformation. Without destruction, stagnation takes root, and life becomes a repetition of what no longer serves growth. On the other hand, creation is the force that inspires us to imagine, to build, to shape meaning out of chaos. It is the energy that drives art, science, love, and all acts of nurturing. Creation gives birth to language, to civilizations, to music and poetry, to innovations that change the course of history. It is the force that allows us to dream beyond survival and to touch realms of possibility that animals do not reach. Yet creation does not exist in isolation from destruction. It often emerges through it. A broken heart gives rise to a song. The collapse of one system paves the way for a better one. The death of an old identity gives life to a truer self. The tension between destruction and creation lives inside each person. One moment, the human hand can strike in violence. The next, that same hand can cradle a child with tenderness. The mind that plots cruelty can also conceive works of profound beauty. This paradox unsettles us because we prefer to imagine ourselves as purely good, as aligned only with the constructive. But to be whole is to admit that the same inner fire that inspires can also consume. What matters is not the erasure of one side, but the conscious relationship we form with both. History shows how these powers shape entire civilizations. Wars, revolutions, and acts of violence reveal the destructive current in human nature. They leave scars across cultures and lives, yet from those very ashes, art, philosophy, and new social orders have been born. The Renaissance emerged after centuries of turmoil. Advances in human rights followed the collapse of oppressive systems. Destruction clears the ground, but creation ensures something takes root in its place. Both powers dance together in the evolution of humanity and within the life of every individual. In daily life, this duality manifests in subtle ways. Words can wound deeply or uplift profoundly. Choices can dismantle trust or build intimacy. Thoughts themselves can spiral into despair or give rise to visions of hope. Every day, people stand at the crossroads of these forces, deciding, consciously or unconsciously, how to wield them. To deny destructive impulses entirely is dangerous, for what is denied often grows in secret, emerging in uncontrollable ways. To overindulge in them, however, leads to chaos. The balance comes when destruction is recognized as part of the human condition and is channeled toward transformation rather than ruin. Creative power, too, requires awareness. Without direction, it can become indulgence, producing endless novelty without depth. But when guided by intention, it can heal, inspire, and move humanity closer to understanding itself. A writer may transform inner chaos into a story that speaks to millions. An activist may turn rage into movements,